1871 to 1919, was one of the most important Marxist theorists and revolutionary activists of the early 20th century. Born in Poland under Russian rule, she became a leading figure in the German Social Democratic Party, SPD, and a key voice in the international socialist movement. Her pamphlet, Reform or Revolution, originally published in 1899, was written as a polemic against Eduard Bernstein, another influential SPD theorist, who in the late 1890s developed what became known as revisionism. Bernstein argued that the classical Marxist expectation of capitalism, collapsing through its own contradictions, was outdated. He believed socialism could be achieved gradually through democratic reforms, parliamentary politics, and social legislation, without the necessity of a revolutionary rupture. Luxemburg's work emerged at a time when the socialist movement in Europe faced a strategic crossroads. Industrial capitalism was expanding, labor unions were becoming stronger, and democratic institutions in countries like Germany were slowly gaining power. Many within the SPD questioned whether the revolutionary strategy advocated by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels was still necessary or practical. Against this backdrop, Reform or Revolution served as Luxemburg's systematic defense of revolutionary Marxism and her critique of Bernstein's evolutionary socialism. Bernstein's revisionism. Bernstein's ideas, published in articles and his book, The Preconditions of Socialism, challenged core Marxist assumptions. 1. Capitalism's stability. Bernstein claimed that capitalism had shown a remarkable capacity to adapt, avoiding crises of the magnitude predicted by Marx. 2. The growth of the middle class. Rather than a simple polarization between bourgeoisie and proletariat, Bernstein saw an expansion of intermediate strata, such as small proprietors, managers, and skilled professionals. 3. Democratic progress. He emphasized the gains made through parliamentary reforms, trade unions, and cooperative movements, arguing these could gradually lead to socialism without violent revolution. 4. Ethical socialism. Bernstein grounded his position in moral and ethical terms, advocating for a humane and just society, rather than insisting on the inevitability of historical laws. For Bernstein, these trends suggested that social democracy should abandon the rhetoric of revolutionary overthrow and instead focus on improving workers' conditions within capitalism. Luxemburg's response. In Reform or Revolution, Luxemburg dismantles Bernstein's arguments point by point. Her critique centers on both theoretical and practical aspects. A. Reforms versus Revolution. Luxemburg's core thesis is that social reforms and revolution are not alternative paths to the same goal, but qualitatively different processes. Reforms operate within the framework of the capitalist system and cannot, by themselves, transform its fundamental structures. Revolution, by contrast, involves a rupture in which the capitalist state is replaced by a socialist order. She does not reject reforms. In fact, she sees them as valuable for improving workers' lives and strengthening their organizational capacity. But she insists that reforms must be pursued as part of a broader revolutionary strategy. Without that ultimate goal, reformism risks becoming accommodation to capitalism. B. The nature of capitalism. Luxemburg argues that capitalism is inherently unstable and crisis-prone. While it may adapt temporarily, its fundamental contradictions between capital and labor, between production for profit and human needs, remain. Economic crises are not abolished by reforms. They are only postponed or mitigated. She points to the expansion of markets, imperialism, and militarism as evidence that capitalism's survival depends on ever-intensifying exploitation and global competition. For Luxemburg, this dynamic will eventually lead to conditions ripe for revolutionary change. Political power in the state. One of Luxemburg's most forceful points is that the capitalist state is not a neutral instrument that can be gradually transformed into a socialist one. The state serves the interests of the ruling capitalist class, and while it may concede reforms under pressure, it will ultimately defend property relations through repression if necessary. Thus, she warns that parliamentary work and electoral victories cannot substitute for mass action by the working class. The transition to socialism requires a seizure of political power by the proletariat, something that cannot occur simply through legislative reforms. D. The role of class struggle. For Luxemburg, the engine of historical change is the class struggle. Reforms can strengthen the working class if they are won through active struggle. but reforms gained passively or through reliance on parliamentary elites risk demobilizing the proletariat. She emphasizes the importance of mass strikes, demonstrations, and direct action as means of developing workers' consciousness and readiness for revolutionary transformation. 4. Key theoretical insights. Luxemburg's reform or revolution contains several insights that have influenced later socialist thought. 1. Reforms as a byproduct of struggle. Genuine reforms are typically won through pressure from below, not granted from above out of goodwill. 2. Capitalism's adaptability has limits. While capitalism can evolve, it cannot eliminate exploitation or inequality without abolishing itself. 3. The danger of reformism. When reform becomes the goal rather than a means, the movement risks losing its transformative vision. 4. Unity of means and ends. The socialist movement's methods must reflect its goal. Relying solely on parliamentary politics can distort socialist aims. 5. Critique of Bernstein's method. Luxemburg also challenges Bernstein's methodology. She accuses him of abandoning the scientific analysis of historical materialism in favor of moral appeals and selective empirical observations. Where Bernstein sees the growth of cooperatives and unions as signs of socialism's gradual emergence, Luxemburg views them as still embedded in the capitalist system, often functioning in ways that reproduce capitalist relations. Moreover, she argues that Bernstein's reliance on statistics about economic stability ignores the underlying volatility of capitalism and the imperialist competition that was already leading to militarization and conflict at the turn of the century. Chapter 6. Practical implications for the socialist movement. In organizational terms, Luxemburg's position implied that the SPD must maintain its revolutionary program and avoid becoming a mere reformist party. This meant supporting reforms, but always linking them to the broader socialist objective, encouraging mass action and workers' self-organization alongside parliamentary participation, preparing for moments of revolutionary crisis rather than assuming a linear path of gradual improvement. Luxemburg feared that a purely reformist orientation would lead the party into collaboration with bourgeois forces, blunting its capacity to challenge capitalism at its roots. 7. Historical reception and impact. Reform or revolution was widely read within the SPD and the broader socialist movement. While Luxemburg did not succeed in halting the growth of revisionism, her arguments became a touchstone for the revolutionary wing of social democracy. Like the debate between reformists and revolutionaries intensified in the early 20th century, particularly after the outbreak of World War I in 1914, when the SPD leadership supported war credits, an action Luxemburg saw as a betrayal of socialist internationalism. This split ultimately contributed to the formation of the Spartacus League and later the Communist Party of Germany, KPD, in which Luxemburg played a central role. Relevance today. Although written more than a century ago, reform or revolution continues to resonate in debates about social change. In progressive politics, the tension between working within existing institutions and seeking systemic transformation remains central. In labor movements, Luxemburg's insistence on the importance of direct action and class struggle challenges purely bureaucratic or electoral strategies. In global justice movements, her analysis of capitalism's expansionary and imperialist tendencies finds echoes in critiques of neoliberal globalization. Modern scholars and activists often revisit Luxemburg's work to understand the limitations of reformism and the conditions under which meaningful transformation might occur. Criticisms and limitations. Some critics have argued that Luxemburg underestimated capitalism's ability to integrate reforms into its functioning without collapsing. Indeed, the post-World War II welfare states in Western Europe appeared to deliver substantial improvements in workers' lives without revolutionary rupture. Others note that her theory offered less concrete guidance on how to transition from reform struggles to revolutionary situations, or how to maintain democratic freedoms in a post-revolutionary socialist state. Nonetheless, even her critics acknowledge that reform or revolution posed questions that remain vital for any movement seeking to transcend capitalism. Conclusion. Reform or revolution is both a historical document of an early 20th century ideological dispute and a timeless intervention into the strategy of socialist movements. Rosa Luxemburg's passionate defense of revolutionary politics against the lure of gradualism remains a powerful reminder that the pursuit of social justice requires clarity about ends as well as means. She teaches that reforms, while valuable, must never be mistaken for the transformation of the system itself, and that without a revolutionary horizon, the struggle risks becoming an endless series of compromises that leave the foundations of inequality intact. For Luxemburg, the choice was not between rejecting reforms or embracing revolution. It was about integrating reforms into a strategy that always pointed toward the ultimate goal, the collective, democratic control of society's resources and the liberation of humanity from exploitation.